We're here to bring a new type of news show.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are New Generation.
Bringing news just for you. It's Monday, March 16th here in Seoul. I'm Isujin, and this is News Generation. Joining us today is Cheska.
Happy Monday, everyone!
Happy Monday!
Woo-hoo!
Also, Julie is with
Happy
us.
Monday.
Happy Monday. And both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. So it's the first day of the work week, so let's start with a movie that's been dominating the box office here in Korea called The King's Warden. The film has become one of the biggest hits in theaters since its release, drawing audiences of all ages. It tells the story of young King Danjong, who is often remembered in Korean history as a powerless leader. But this film reimagines him in a very different light. So Cheska, did you get a chance to watch it, and what did you think about it?
I actually watched it. Actually, we watched it together.
Oh,
yes,
cute.
for this particular episode. As you can see, I'm still living in the King's Warden era.
I like your hair especially.
Thank you, with my Korean traditional outfit. But I did, and I actually cried. And I even knew the storyline going in, but it still got me. And the director, Jang Hang-jun, is known for his humor. So there are some very fun elements, so you don't have to worry too much. But it is an incredibly sad, real historical movie based on the tragic life of King Danjong, who was exiled from the palace at the age of only 15. The movie follows the story of his final years of life living among villages in his place of exile. There were many interesting hidden messages. I don't want to spoil too much for our viewers, but pay a lot of attention to the food that comes up in the film. Now, the film has now surpassed 12 million cumulative viewers and is continuing its run towards the top 10 highest grossing film in Korean box office history. It also considered a landmark hit because it just reopened that 10 million audience club for the Korean film history after a period of box office slowdown.
So like how you mentioned the humor aspect of it, because it's historically, it could be a tragic story, but there are some very funny elements to it.
It's so funny in the beginning.
Especially in the beginning, right? Exactly.
And I think that's why the tragedy sort of hits later on, because there's a lot of fun, laughter, heartfelt goodness that builds up, and then bam, it gets
There's
you
a
at
little
the
bit of
end.
everything.
Everything, yeah.
What about you, Julie?
Yeah, just like Jessica mentioned, we watched the film together and it was really, really fun because this was actually my first time watching a Korean historical film. So I really went in watching this movie with no expectations and I just had no idea about this context as well as the historical time period. So it was really, really fun for me to watch. I really enjoyed the experience. And I guess the most memorable part of this, I didn't really understand the power dynamics that came in play with the royal family and just everyone else. And it was really shocking to see how people would just fight and kill people just to hold power. So I really left this movie just having a lot of respect for Kim Danjong and how much he's grown throughout his life. And I really recommend watching this film.
I mean, that's wonderful to hear. So it seems the film does a good job of drawing viewers in, even for those who are not familiar with Korean history. So we're going to talk more about this, but first, let's take a look at the screen. With the rise of OTT platforms, films around the world have struggled to draw audiences to theaters the way they once did. So when a movie becomes a box office hit today, it's an even bigger achievement. A Korean film that has recently surpassed the 10 million viewer mark is drawing particular attention not only for its success, but because it's a historical drama, a genre traditionally known for having difficulty reaching mainstream popularity. Today on News Generation, we take a closer look at the renewed spotlight on King Danjong, the trends emerging around his growing popularity, why fans are becoming so invested in the young monarch, and what's drawing younger audiences to historical dramas and films. As we just saw in the video, the film isn't just a box office hit, it's also sparking unexpected interest in the historical figure of King Danjong, especially among younger generations. But to start us off, why are so many people so interested and so invested in this film?
Because as you mentioned, Sujin, I think historically, King Danjong was portrayed as like a powerless, a very young ruler who sort of lost his throne to the power dynamics. But I think this movie sort of drew on a completely different view of what it's like and what sort of growth he went through. So historically, being remembered as the weak and tragic young king who lost his throne, turning into a man and trying to fight for his life throughout his period of exile, I think really got to people. And also you're seeing a more human story to him. And I think it also helps that the actor who was portraying King Danjong was a K-pop trainee and a rising star. And so now people or MZs are coming up with nicknames like Danjong Oppa or Ihong이 Oppa, kind of like it's an endearing term for someone. It's very affectionate nickname. And Ihong이 is the actual name of King Danjong. And when I was hearing it, I thought, but he was exiled in his teenager. I don't think he's the Oppa, but that shows how much people are invested in the character as well. Yeah.
You know what they say? If someone's good looking, no matter their age, they're an OPPA, they're Oppa.
It's Oppa.
So it's interesting how the film has completely reshaped his image from a powerless young king to someone audiences can emotionally connect with. And that growing interest seems to be spilling over beyond the movie itself. So what new trends are emerging as Danjong's popularity grows, Julian?
Yeah, so due to this movie's popularity, new trends have been emerging, particularly domestic travel. Now, the filming location of the movie, Cheongryangpo, which was the actual place of exile for Danjong of Chosun, has recently been seeing large crowds during the holidays, with numbers of visitors increasing 5 times compared to the last year. In addition, there has been a surge in online reviews of the tombs of historical figures featured in the film. So visitors leave messages of remembrance and mourning at Danjong's tomb, while at the tomb of Sejo of Joseon, formerly known as Prince Suyang, located at Gangneung, many of the comments express criticism and condemnation for this person. On top of that, book sales of Danjong's story have increased by 80 times, and interest in the Joseon Dynasty historical time period has significantly grown as well. People are also collecting photo cards of the actor who played Danjong, like we mentioned earlier. The trend of calling him as Oppa is also part of the trend playing.
Danjong Oppa.
Right.
Yeah.
So all this really shows how film has sparked curiosity about history and even influenced travel and book sales. I actually have a colleague that visited Yeongwon. Apparently there's such a long line to see all the sites there.
Wow.
So that's something interesting. So it raises a bigger question about why the story resonates so quickly. So why are audiences so drawn to King Danjong's story today?
I think definitely the tragic story that is too human and too relatable. So if you quickly take a look at the screen, we've prepared a brief summary of the story of Danjong. So according to a bit of research, Danjong was the first son and the only son of King Munjong, so who is the direct son of great King Sejong, who created the Korean language. So Danjong, being the grandson, was loved by the grandfather, King Sejong the Great, and was in direct line to the throne. Now, lo and behold, when he was only 12 years old, all of his direct family line, parents, grandparents, mother, father, had passed away, only leaving him in the jungle of power-hungry relatives. And it's exactly this kind of tragedy that we can all relate to, just imagining you're just a teenage boy and there's no one to protect you left in the wild. And I think this is what really got to the people. And there's a very famous line from the movie. And in Korean it goes, 자신의 의지대로 살지 못하는 삶을 아는가? Which means when young boy Danjong says, do you know what it feels like to be so powerless in your own life? I think it hit the heart of everyone who was watching the film.
Right.
It's getting me teary.
I listened to a podcast where the director came on. He said what really drew him to the story was that Danjong's actually a very smart child growing up, which is why, like you mentioned, his grandfather really loved him.
Yeah, loved him, and sort of expected him to be a great king.
Exactly.
Yeah, when he was ascended to the throne. But the tragedy unfolded.
Exactly. So his life really does read like a tragic drama, which may be why people feel such a strong emotional connection to him. But there may also be a deeper generational reason behind that connection. So why does Danjong's story resonate particularly with millennials and Gen Zs, Julian?
Yeah, so for many millennials and Gen Z who tend to be sensitive to issues of fairness and justice, they have a lot of anger towards Sejo of Joseon and support Danjong of Joseon instead. So instead of focusing on the supposed winners of history, the storytelling highlights the weak who've become victims, which really resonates with millennials and Gen Z audiences. We can see this in play when they make the pilgrimages to related sites and leaving low star ratings for sites relating to Sejo, while leaving positive ratings for Danjong-related sites. It is clear that fairness and justice are important qualities that millennials and Gen Z care about here in Korea, and it doesn't really matter who has the most power. What mattered was how they treated others.
And it's so funny how they leave like a low rating
was
and like
comment on that.
criticisms
Right.
and like condemnation comments.
People are definitely invested in this, as you can tell.
Very much emotionally invested.
And so it's fascinating how even historical figures are now becoming part of modern fan culture, I guess a bit of a hate culture as well. And the interest doesn't seem to be limited to Korea. So the film has opened overseas. So what has the reaction been like, Jessica?
This is actually very interesting. So the film was also released overseas in February, reaching audiences in North America, Australia, New Zealand, and Taiwan. Since then, viewers from around the world have been sharing their reactions online, and I actually pulled up a few that I would like to read because this was so beautiful and well written. One of the viewers said, "A long hidden chapter of Korean history finally given a voice. The performers carry pain, truth, and courage that words cannot fully express. A deeply powerful and unforgettable film."
Wow, that was beautiful.
That was so well written from an international viewer. And there were a lot of comments about the beauty of cinematography, even like even the actors. A lot of foreign audiences were actually interested in the actual actors who portrayed the characters as well.
I think that's also why people are flocking to where it was filmed
Yes.
as well, because it looked so beautiful on screen as well.
And the cinematography just made it 100 times better, I think.
Well, agreed. So it's great to see Korean historical stories reaching global audiences as well. But the reaction from viewers unfamiliar with Korean history has also been quite interesting. So how else are international viewers generally responding to the story?
Yeah, so the film sparked a lot of interest in Korean history amongst international viewers. For many, this is probably the first time that the film actually exposed Korean history to them, so it definitely left a huge impression on them. I can relate definitely because I admittedly was not very exposed to content set in Korean historical times. So when I first watched this movie, the ending honestly just shocked me. I distinctly remember hearing sniffles and crying in the theater.
And next to you, crying. I was crying.
Yeah, but personally for me, I was just so shocked that I didn't really process how sad the situation really was until after I left the theater. And just like me, many foreigners who are not familiar with Korean history, a lot of them report that the ending was very sad and shocking as well. So especially if this film is maybe set in a background that's not the most familiar to you, I really highly recommend watching it because from my own personal experience, it really just made it really open my eyes to see how the world was back in the 1400s, something that's so far away, long time ago that we can't really process it now.
Right.
And I'm glad you mentioned that because people are kind of, a lot of directors or like producers are afraid of really investing in historical films because the history is kind of like a spoiler itself. People know the history, so they know how it's going to end. But for global audiences, like you said, that's a perk that they don't know what's going to happen.
Exactly.
So it sounds like the film not only tells a powerful story, but also introduces many international viewers to a chapter of Korean history they may not have encountered before. And to gain a global perspective, we're going to speak with someone from overseas who has also watched the film. And that conversation is coming up right after the break, so don't go anywhere.
NewsGen wants to hear from you. Go to YouTube and search out channel Arirang News. Click Posts and cast your vote in the poll. Make a new type of news with us.
Joining us today is Mary from the US who has watched The King's Warden. So hello, Mary. Thank you so much for connecting with us today.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
All right, to start us off, so what did you think of the film The King's Warden?
I absolutely loved it. I went and saw it without really knowing anything about the history. And I knew it was a historical movie. I knew a little bit about the cast. And I had heard how well it was doing in Korea. And that's really why I wanted to go see it. So when it came to Los Angeles, I went and saw it. And I was swept away. It makes you laugh. It makes you cry. You're also really drawn in by the Warden character, this man who's trying so hard to save his village, to make sure everybody is fed and everybody has opportunities. And then you see the king come in and the way they just all connect. It's really beautiful and like you guys said, very tragic by the end. But it's a great story. It's a great story of friendship and humanity. And I enjoyed it. And the theater was packed. And it sounded to me like everybody enjoyed it.
You know, we were talking about how like Korean history could be something unfamiliar to a lot of foreign audience, but we're also curious, does your country's history have a story similar to this one?
You know, I don't think so. compared to Korea, the United States is a very young country. And this story is almost 300 years before the United States even existed. And we never had a monarchy either. So we don't really have that level of history here. I think the closest we really have is like the English kings and queens, who are kind of a part of our history, but not something we're really well versed in the United States to the extent that we would know the legends and the stories. So this is really unique. Stories that are countries that have monarchies as part of their history, I think fascinate a lot of people in the United States because we've just never had that at all.
Yeah, I definitely relate as an American too. So to wrap things up, did the film make you curious about Korean history or places in Korea?
Absolutely. I went home and I was immediately searching what was true and what was embellished and what the actual facts were. And I was surprised to learn that the king actually was as young as he was in the movie, because that was a big part of, I think, why you connect with him so quickly in the movie. He's so young, and you just feel for somebody that young who has suffered so much tragedy and is under so much pressure. So going home and researching about him and learning about him, I was surprised to discover he was as young as he was. And also just the landscapes in the movie. I would love to travel and see that sort of beautiful countryside, and to visit the palaces and the monuments and the things that still exist. It would be a lot of fun to go see it in person.
I think for me too, when I went back after I watched, I went back home and looked up the facts, and then I think it was a way for me to kind of revisit Korean history as well. So that's very also I can relate to that as well. Right. So
Yeah.
I'm glad you enjoyed the film, and thank you so much for telling us your insights.
Of course.
Thank you.
So we've just spoken with an overseas fan of The King's Warden about what she thought of the film, whether similar stories exist in her country's history, and whether the movie sparked her curiosity about Korean history or historical science. So it's interesting to see how a Korean historical story is resonating with audiences far beyond Korea. So what do people enjoy about Korean historical films and dramas?
So this is very interesting. So out of the 25 Korean films that have surpassed the 10 million viewer mark, as we said, it's a very monumental figure here in South Korea. Nearly half, 12 films, including The King and the Clown, 왕과사는남자, 광해, are all history-based and or periodical drama-based films. Now, analysts say this reflects Korea's deep cultural connection to its past, having lived through a long and turbulent 5,000-year history. There's so much story to draw, both to understand cultural roots and to understand and find deep personal connections as well as life lessons. And I think this could definitely be one of the reasons that there is this very particular Korean sentiment called han or 애한, which is very hard to explain in English, but the best that I can do is like a deeply rooted grief, sadness, sort of longing, and even yearning. And I think this is most well delivered through Korean historical stories because there's so much different conflicts that happen in human life. And I also highly recommend that people who are interested in Korean entertainment, culture, definitely watch a few of them on the list, because I think it will resonate deeply with our viewers as well. Yeah.
I mean, that really highlights how deeply history is woven into Korea's cultural identity and how historical stories continue to resonate with modern audiences. But the appeal of historical dramas may also reflect how people relate those stories to the present. So this is a bit of a more philosophical question, but how do historical dramas reflect the times that we're living in today, Julian?
Yeah, so I am a strong believer that history is one of the best ways to avoid making mistakes in the present. So even though circumstances in the past were often very different, people still face many of the same problems that we deal with today. And so I believe that from history, there is so much that we can learn from that. At the end of the day, we are all human. We all share the same worries and same fears. So especially during times of confusion and division, I really think that historical dramas can be very relevant in our current society. They allow us to look into layers of history to better understand our current situation and reconnect with the shared sense of community that really does help uplift each other and really get us out of hard times.
So that's a fascinating point. History can sometimes offer perspective and even comfort during uncertain times. And there are now viewers who are intrigued by the film and want to learn more about the real story behind it. So what would you recommend, Cheska, for those who want to learn about King Danjong or Danjong Oppa?
If you want to learn about Danjong Oppa, definitely doing a little bit of research beforehand. Not extensive, because it's also good to be surprised when you're watching the film, right? But because it's based on an actual Korean history, I think it would be a great idea Korea to do a little bit of research. And then doing the research will actually help, I think, some of our foreign viewers or people who are not familiar with Korean history actually relate to the time and sort of the class and the conflict that was happening during those times. And the sentiment would hit a bit harder if they understand the background a little bit more.
Right. So, Julian, do you have any tips?
So I watched this movie without knowing anything at all. But that's just honestly how I personally like watching movies. I like to be surprised. But whether you are the type of person to know about the context of the story beforehand, or you want to just watch it with surprise, I really think it's important to take the time to learn about the history during this time period. It will help you understand the movie and just how deep the story really is, as well as the cultural meaning behind it. So after I watched the movie, I went down a whole rabbit hole. I was watching videos and just reading so many articles and summaries about the movie. And from that experience, as well as watching the movie from just watching without any context, I really developed a deeper sense of appreciation and love for my country's history and respect for people who, despite hardship and even potential death, still fight for justice, which I think is really relevant in our current society in 2026 today.
Agreed. So, historical stories may be set in the past, but their themes continue to resonate with audiences today. And as this film shows, even centuries-old figures like King Danjong can find new fans among younger generations. And hopefully that renewed interest may inspire even more people to explore the more personal backstories behind Korean history. And that brings us to the end of today's episode of News Generation. But News Gen will be back tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. Korea time with more stories and discussions. Big thanks to Cheska.
Pleasure's always mine. Thank you.
And also Julian.
Thank you so much for having me today.
And as well. And to our viewers, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully this inspires you to explore more Korean history, maybe leading you to join a fan club of another king from centuries ago. We are
News Generation.